The better versus worse needs to stop. Hardware is better at what hardware does, and plugins are better at what plugins do. At the same time, there's no plugins that does what some piece of hardware do. That's a fact. There's no reason to get mad, and there's no reason to defend a position that nobody took in the first place. But this sort of us against them, you know, the ADB versus hybrid and OTB, it's one-sided. It's only people that are completely in the box that scream and shout, you don't need hardware, you can do everything in a box. And everybody who has hardware will say, yeah, of course you can. That's not the point. You know, I made a video a couple of days ago, was actually a cutout edit from another video that I thought could be useful. The video is meant to help people, as the title say, let me save you money and time, and was basically an advice on what is a healthy mindset, in my opinion, when thinking about buying analog gear, especially for home studio people. The video was very well received, over 10,000 views in a couple of days, and everybody thanked me for that. But there were a couple of comments on it that were disconnected and unrelated to the message in the video, and they were sort of answering something that was never said, which was, without analog gear, you can't make a record. Now, at this point, I'm pretty sure that anyone with a working brain cell knows that you can mix records in the box, out of the box, full analog, full digital, hybrid, because has been the case for decades at this point. And I'm pretty sure you can't find one single video in which I say you need analog gear to make records. And why I don't like to make videos that state the obvious, I dislike even more platitudes and cliche. The video is an advice coming from someone who has a little bit of experience, we can say, almost a couple of decades in mixing, mastering, producing, and recording, and who spent a lot of money and lost a lot of money in both plugins and analog. So I don't really gain anything if people buy or doesn't buy gear. Mine was a genuine advice. But let's get to the comments, because I want to address some of them, because apparently there's quite some confusion on the subject. Analog, not analog. Let's get to the video. Hello everyone, welcome back to MixFest TV. Hope you're having a great day. Before we start, please check the info box down below for my mixing courses on ProMix Academy, free plugins, special discounts and offers. And if the videos are helping you, you want to support the channel, but most important, access to a whole new series of members only mixing courses and videos, click the join button down here. See all the perks of becoming a MixFest TV member, which includes mix consultations with me via Skype or email. So in that video, the message was pretty simple, I thought. Squeeze everything that you can from the tools that you already have, whether they are plugins, whether it's hardware, before thinking about upgrading. Make sure that you reached the limit, okay? And you realize that now you have enough skills that if you have that plugin or that hardware unit, you could take your mixes to the next level. So it's basically, don't buy gear trying to fill the lack of knowledge and experience and skills, because that's not going to happen, okay? Sometimes a unit or a plugin can inspire you and give you new ideas, absolutely. But if you are on a budget, try to do the best with what you have. Simple message, right? It doesn't say you need gear or you need to buy gear or you can't make records without analog. At the same time, because in the original video where I took the cut out from, I was actually reviewing one of the many new hardware units that I have. I was showing my setup just to update the audience. And I think that maybe upset some people. I don't really know, because you see my gear every day. Yeah, I got like, what, 4 new machines in the past 2-3 months, but because I'm a mix engineer, I do this for a living. Those are the tools that allow me to be faster and make better mixes. Me. That is not a rule. It doesn't apply to everybody, okay? Some people can and have been making great mixes totally in the box. I prefer hardware. Most professional and non-professional engineers still prefer hardware. I don't know why this seems to upset some people, but it's the truth. And it's also the truth that plugins are not hardware. They don't sound the same. And hardware doesn't sound like plugins. No one is better than the other. And everybody uses both nowadays. So I don't understand. Actually, who uses hardware also uses and praise plugins. And I don't want to offend anyone, even though someone is going to be offended, fuck it, who uses only plugins because maybe they can't afford analog, are the ones who say you don't need analog. You never tried it. How can you know? Like if you don't have experience with analog, if you don't have years of experience with analog, if you don't have years of experience comparing the two and working with two, how can you state you don't need it if you never touched it, or if you touched it twice? Based on comparison from the manufacturer of the plugin? Are we kidding? I take pride and I feel very confident in saying that I do very unbiased hardware versus plugin comparisons, and also allow me this very competent as well, because I've been using both for almost a decade, and before going into a review or a comparison, I make sure that I know my shit. You don't have to agree with that, I don't care. But how does it make sense that is always people that doesn't have hardware and don't have experience with hardware that say you don't need it? And mind you, having access to a piece of hardware or a board or whatever once a month or once every 2 weeks for like 2 hours doesn't mean that you know how to use hardware. And that was also my point in the video. Buying hardware makes you a collector. It doesn't make you a mix engineer, okay? If you take hardware by itself, will not make anything better by default, just by turning it on. Very, very few units are so universally good sounding that literally just turning them on can do that, okay? But there are also some plugins that do that. Few, but there are. It's never 100% that you need a degree of knowledge, but still, they're a pretty safe bet. So given what everybody already knows, that just buying hardware won't give you anything, if you take someone that is an absolute master at mixing in the box, but never touched hardware, and you put it in front of my desk, they wouldn't know what to do with it. I've seen it in person, and that's normal. And you all know this from countless videos in which I said, even if you can get close to on hardware with a plugin, the gain staging is completely different, the settings are going to be completely different, so many things are completely different that you can translate one-to-one what you know with plugins to hardware, and vice versa. There were some old school mix engineers that when the computers came in, they had to get an assistant to run the software because they didn't know how to. They were used to mix on an analog console with tape. So it's never a matter of better or worse. Hardware is better at what hardware does, and plugins are better at what plugins do. Do you want an example? Spiff or Sooth, OX Sound. There's no hardware that does that. What these two plugins do, there's not. Or dynamic EQs. You can be so precise with plugins dynamic EQs, you can't find an hardware that precise. Or effects. There are so many effects that are so crazy and amazing, and there's no hardware for that. At the same time, there's no plugins that does what some piece of hardware do. That's a fact. There's no reason to get mad, and there's no reason to defend a position that nobody took in the first place, especially me. Like I never said you need hardware. Nobody with a half of a brain today will tell you you need hardware and you can't do anything without it. But if you are a professional mix engineer, you have to compete with what's out there. And what's out there for the most part is still mix on hybrid at least. So what is the discussion? Why there is a discussion? There are some good sounding songs that are mixed in the box, but there's also a lot of crap on charts. Songs that are successful, but they sound bad. And at the same time, there are amazing sounding songs that there are a niche or nobody knows them, unknown independent bands. But this is a whole different discussion, but it brings me to the comment. It links to the comments, okay? Before going to them, one last thing. Very rarely you hear people who has analog who are not really insecure about their craft, I want to say. They never go around bashing people using plugins. Yeah, of course, if you dig enough, you can find a handful of snobby people that like to rub in everybody's face how much gear they have, and because of that, their products are better, but that's just untrue. But let's go to the comments. One of the first one was, great mixes come from good sound selection, composition, and arrangement. No, great mixes come from a good mix engineer, regardless of what he uses. Hardware, not hardware, plugins, analog, it doesn't matter. Good sound selection, composition, and arrangement make a great song. You can destroy a great song with a bad mix. So I don't understand why such a comment is in that video. We're not talking about songwriting, okay? And the two things are not really related. They are to some extent, as I myself stated so many times, the job of a mix engineer is 1,000 times better if you receive a song that is well arranged, well produced, and when the source sounds are great. Okay, it makes your job easier, but it doesn't just make your job easier. This is, I think, the misunderstanding. It makes your job easier as in you don't have to waste 2 hours or 10 fixing what's wrong before actually starting to mix and enhance the product and make it sound like a record. Okay, so in that way, and actually because you're probably more inspired because the song come together faster, you can take it to another level. So the mixing and the production and the songwriting are very linked in that sense, but all the top sounding tracks are like that. To say that, it's just a cliche, it's a platitude, it's a given, okay? If you don't have a good arrangement sound selection, a mix engineer can probably make more difference from how the rough mix sounds to the final product, as in probably the rough mix is a 3, and you can take it with the mixing and all the tricks to a 7, but you can never take it to a 10. If you give me good material, then together we can go to 10, all right? So that is regardless your gear. Now, like I said before, many mix engineers use analog, period. And there are a few exceptions that are successfully mixing in the box. First of all, they probably mixed for decades, and if they did, they definitely mixed with analog before, so they do have a reference point. I mix in the box. I did mix several singles and albums and EP in the box, even if I had the gear. Sometimes I didn't have it and it was a forced choice, but there have been some times in which I decided not to use gear because it fit better. Same for mastering. Mastering for me is probably 30% of the time I stay in the box for artistic choices because it's better. So the better versus worse needs to stop. But one of the problems that I'm worried about, and trust me, not for myself, I'm good, but for the newbies, for people who is about to learn and start this as either a career or a passion, is some people take exceptions. Oh, those 3 artists mixed all in a box. They did all in, a laptop and they are charting. Even if that's true, that's how you give people false expectation. So they try the same thing, which is an exception, and it happened for several reasons and stars aligning once in a million. And they keep trying doing that, and they fail, and they don't understand why. And they start thinking, God, I suck. How about instead those were exceptions, and you have way more chances going the general route, because success, whether it's commercial or technical, as in a great sounding mix, happened way more times in the other way than it did for those 2 or 3 exceptions. Doesn't that make sense? It would be like you take a super talented athlete, genetically gifted, that trained for 2 years and, hit a world record on squats or, deadlift or something like that. And you start training like he did. Dude, you're not gonna make it because you're not him and you're not that exception. Well, instead, if you look at the previous maybe 500 records, you see that that is an exception and people have been doing that, reaching that goal in another way, which gives you more chances. So again, with technology becoming so popular, of course, there are gonna be several tracks and good sounding songs popping up in the box. It's completely possible, like I said, a billion times. But if you take a look at the history of music up until now, you want to really compare the numbers, how many songs or how many successful songs, whatever you want to take into account, have been mixed completely in the box versus hybrid or analog, and why you have to do this. If you can't afford analog, fuck it. You know, use what you have, like I said in the video, and squeeze everything out of it. If this is your passion, you're gonna save money and buy it. If it is gonna be your job, you're gonna make money and buy it if you want, if you feel like you need it. But this sort of us against them, you know, the ADB versus hybrid and OTB, it's one-sided. It's only people that are completely in the box that scream and shout. You don't need hardware, you can do everything in a box. And everybody who has hardware will say, yeah, of course you can. That's not the point, you know? Some of the replies from great mixes come from good sound selection, composition, and arrangement. Someone replied, this is the true key, but people don't want to hear it. What are you talking about? That is a given. That is a concept that everybody who makes music knows and have been knowing for years. It has nothing to do with gear. Of course, good composition and arrangement are at the core of any good songs, but that doesn't give you a good mix by default. If a song is well produced, then it doesn't require analog gear in order to sound good. It can be mixed in the box. It can be mixed in the box even if it's badly produced. Yes, it can be mixed in the box, but it won't sound the same as if it's mixed with analog or in hybrid. Nobody ever stated better or worse. And it's not about the gear, it's about the mix engineer. So again, this was a position that nobody ever took. So I don't understand why you need to defend the opposite position. Then there's the next level. A well-produced and composed track will sound pretty finished if you've done everything right. No, it won't. It won't. Let me ask you this. Why every single top production in the world, major, big independents, they do have mixing and mastering engineers to mix their stuff? And again, you take few exceptions that did everything there, and probably is usually in the electronic and EDM music, because that's a whole different story. Like if you have a bunch of samples cut, copied and pasted together, you're probably closer, and it could probably go out like that and be standardized to some of the not really great sounding tracks, but they are already pre-made sound. So you won't hear like noises or all the problems that you have on a real instruments when you record it, but also you won't have a great sounding track. A well-produced and composed track will then, again, make the mix engineer job easier, better, but the final product will be better, will be competing with the top. That's what you want. Unless you want average, that's what we are talking about. It's not an option, it's essential that the producer gives you high quality material to work with if you want to reach those levels, the big productions levels. And something else, it happened more time than I can count, that a mix engineer doesn't only add something or enhance, but they actually made the sound of that artist with their mixes. I can start naming bands or artists or mixing engineer. Think Andy Wallace, okay? And I'll leave it at that. And look, I understand that hardware is expensive, but there's a goddamn reason because it's expensive, and there's a reason because people buy it. Actually, just so you know, hardware sales went up for the past 3 years more than anything else. So just so you know, because everybody who started completely in the box and all the new wave of home studios, after a couple of years realized like, hey, you know what? There's a wall here somewhere. Some people, maybe because of their style, and that's the case for me, because of their habits, because of how fast they are with hardware, prefer hardware. And another comment is completely unrelated to the video and actually puts words in my mouth that I never said. It sounds like you don't want to admit that great music can be made in any circumstances. Made? You can make music in the bathroom. You can make music in the train. Go back and watch my video on Billie Eilish about the bedroom production. You can make music anywhere. What has to do with mixing? I don't understand. The music making process is a different process than the mixing and the mastering. It's another stage. And I never said that music cannot be made in any circumstances. And I never denied either, but not in this video, in like so many videos before, this shit can be mixed in a box. Like, come on, it's a dead horse. But why all the big productions want their music to be mixed and mastered professionally? Why? Because there's a standard out there. There's personal taste, and then there's an industry standard. So we can debate that all day, but there is. And again, I'm not saying that the industry standard is analog. It's not even, nobody mixes all full analog anymore anyway. So what are we debating? Like 1, 2 piece of hardware or 35 like me? What are we debating? Like why? Every job and every stage of production needs tool, period. Which tool? It's up to you. It's up to what you can afford. It's up to what you prefer. Are you making music to play to your friends or for your own pleasure, or is music making you money? So all these things are context. And if you take away the context and just throw out there cliches, phrases read on a forum, because power to the people, then, there's nothing to talk about. A well-produced song doesn't require analog gear in order to sound good. If you use high-quality sample, they already been recorded through analog gear in maximum fidelity. So hold on. You're basically stating that a well-produced song doesn't require analog because analog has already been used. I'll just leave it at that. It's just a matter of composition and arrangement to make the mix sound good. No, the composition and arrangement make the song flow and they make a song. The mixing is taking those elements and make it sound like a record. And in the process, if you have a good engineer, they will add something more to that piece of music. And whether it's effects, whether it's all the automation, whether it's their interpretation of the song that most times, like I said before, made the sound for a given artist. And on the high quality samples, it's funny because the trend has always been that sample-based music and computer-based music is the one that benefits more of analog processing because they are samples, because they're not real instruments, because they come from a machine. So now all of a sudden is not the case anymore because because now the samples are better and they already used analog. But that also doesn't make sense because think of all the rock records, pop records, electronic records that have mixed up until now. They all recorded literally through preamps, compressors, consoles, tape, and then they have been mixed on analog consoles and outboard compressors and tape. And then they have been mastered on analog compressors and EQ and whatnot. So like having analog at one stage doesn't mean that you don't need it after. But at the same time, doesn't mean that you do need it. It doesn't make sense. You can have a piece of music where samples are not made by using digital. You can mix it in a box and you can master it in the box and it sounds good. And at the same time, the history of recorded music has been made with an analog front end, with an analog mixing, with an analog mastering. And from that point on, hybrid. And for the most part, today is still hybrid. It's always about the skills, the taste, the ears of the engineer. I would invite people not to take exceptions as a rule, because those are exceptions. And if you take exceptions as a rule, you just give people false expectation. And if they keep trying going that way, which is an exception, so by nature is so very rare that happens, they will keep trying, and eventually they will give up. And that's a shame, because maybe they could have done something and they lose drive and they lose passion because they follow that one example that is an exception. And that's a shame, And nobody has to take my advice. It's just an advice. It's out there. Take it or leave it. But I think I'm a pretty straightforward, honest guy. And you can probably tell if you've been following me. I have no interest if people buy gear, don't buy gear. If they mix in the box, they don't mix in the box. Home studios are not a threat to professionals. They're not. There has been cases in which artist released a first album or a first single or whatever, first EP that sounded like absolute shit, okay? It objectively sounded bad. But the songs were good and they got a following, and then, they had the budget to do a big production and they exploded. You see my point? And I think people's perceptions of numbers are a little bit screwed. Why? Because now everybody with a computer make music nowadays to some extent, and they think that only big acts use professional mix engineer and master engineer. No, they don't. Like, I work with so many independent artists. And if you follow me, you follow the social media pages, I literally post a new mix and a new master like every couple of days. And I post only the ones that I can post because I have, permission from the artists. So believe me, who makes music either for a living or trying to make it a living, there's a lot more people doing things the way have been done so far than the exceptions. And especially nowadays, like the budgets are so much lower than they used to be that I don't understand. I made another video about this. I don't know if I'll publish it or not because it's kind of controversial, in which I talk about the devaluing of music today. Music has been devalued so much. And one of the reasons, all the other reasons are in the video if I'll decide to publish, the streaming and whatever else. It's also because artists start to devalue their own music exactly doing that, going the cheapest way possible. The cheapest way possible is usually the crappiest way possible. Okay, you don't need 10 grand to get your music out there, but the fact that you yourself are not willing to invest a little bit in your own art, and then you expect other people to believe in it and to invest, to buy it, it's kind of a faulty starting point, isn't it? Anyway, this came out a longer video than I expected or than I wanted, but I think the point is clear. Everything can be done in every way, with gear, without gear, without a computer, without whatever. But composition and arrangement, while they go hand to hand with mixing, are two separate processing. And the tools that you need are different. The context is different. If you do this for a living, that's your profession or not. But once again, I want to stress it. No, you don't need anything. You don't even need a third-party plugin if you want to put it that way. Do it with your stock plugins. But is that the best you can do? If you can't afford anything, but you want to do music because you're inspired, because it's your call, then by all means, go for it and fuck gear and fuck everything else and just not even think about it. But what I don't understand is the screaming battle. When someone is so vocal, especially on a video that doesn't even touch the subject, and they feel the need to bring that up, that you don't need this and you don't need that, it sounds more like insecurity to me, and it sounds more like they scream that loud because they want to convince themselves more than, pass a message, which was what I wanted to do in that video and what I did in that video. Anyway, this is it for this one. I hope it was useful. I hope you liked it. Please leave all the comments down below. I know there's probably gonna be a Bible of comment down there, but I hope you guys are doing good. Please stay safe out there. Subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notification bell. It helps the channel a lot. Leave a like if you like the video. Follow MixBustTV on Instagram and Facebook. See you next time.